Okay, we're going to get started very, very shortly. Just to let you know that this webinar is going to be about 1 hour. I will be able to take some questions and answers towards the end, so just send those in as and when, and I'll try and cover as many of them as I possibly can. We are covering Tableau Desktop 2020.1. If I just draw your attention to a previous webinar we did, if I just exit this screen. We actually run a host of webinars on our meetup page, and just earlier this week we had Carl Orchin do a feature roundup for Tableau Prep 2020.1. So you can find that over on our YouTube channel. You can see it's this video that was uploaded just yesterday, so you can get involved with that and catch up on that if you missed that webinar. You can catch some of our other webinar and content here on our YouTube channel as well. So if you miss any content, this is the place to go. If you're interested in some of our future events, you can find them all on our meetup page and get signed up. But otherwise, today we're going to be covering Tableau 2020.1. I'll probably start with an introduction of myself. My name's Tim. I'm a consultant at the Information Lab. I've been with the company for just over 6 years now. And I help clients sort of see and understand data. And I'm really passionate about Tableau and some of the new features that they bring to the product. And that's sort of why I'm hosting the webinar today. Now, they've released a whole host of features in this most recent update. It's really incredible, sort of the pace of development of some of the features that they're releasing. And they have this slide here, which sort of groups them into two key areas. And this sort of highlights the key capabilities that Tableau is working on to sort of deliver some new capabilities to their customers. And the features we're going to cover today are mostly around Tableau Desktop, but I'm also going to use the term authoring because a lot of the desktop capabilities are also available through WebEdit. So things like viz animation, dynamic parameters, buffer calculations, they're not just new features in Tableau Desktop, they're also available in Tableau Online and Tableau Server through WebEdit. So it's important to think of them as authoring features, not just desktop features. Now, that said, there's a whole host of other features here that sort of fit other capabilities. You've got Tableau Prep here, which had a whole host of really exciting features that allow people to manage their data and prep their data in sort of new and powerful ways. We've also got some IT and governance features here on the right-hand side that you can see that allow organizations to have a better sort of feel of what data is being used, where it's being used, and to kind of bring some governance to that as well so that it's easier to manage and control. But in the webinar today, we're just going to be focusing on these following features. Improved connectors, the customizable Discover pane, dynamic parameters, buffer calculations, viz animations, some improvements to explain data, and the export button. And I'll try and do this in an order that sort of makes sense for everyone. Okay, the first one is mainly connector updates. So you might be aware that Salesforce acquired Tableau just towards the end of last year. And so it's no surprise here that there are improvements to the Salesforce connector. If you've used the Salesforce data connector before, it's actually quite a powerful feature. It essentially allows you to connect to Salesforce objects and build data visualizations using those objects and sort of build some analytical views that maybe aren't so well suited inside of Salesforce itself. And so with these connector improvements, you will notice faster performance. I've used it myself for the last couple of weeks, actually, and it's been a marked improvement in terms of the way you connect to data. But you can also now use custom SQL in those operations. So before you weren't able to write SQL statements with those objects, but now you can. And you've also got the ability to view more data objects that weren't previously available. So if you've worked with Salesforce and Tableau in the past, there's sort of this juggle you have to do sometimes with your Salesforce admin to make sure that certain formulas and calculations that are custom to Salesforce appear in your Tableau data sources. And so there's some of those are now appearing automatically by default. There's also the addition of some updates to Snowflake connector updates to add role support there as well. The next feature is probably an unsung hero. It's not something that's been highlighted much in many of the new sort of communications, but it's definitely something that I think will be valuable for some of the customers who work in an enterprise context. You can actually customize the Discover pane that you see here on the right-hand side when you launch Tableau. This setting is actually done when you install Tableau through the command line, and can be done after an installation, again by editing preference files related to Tableau, again through the command line, or by having it pre-installed when you install Tableau for the first time through some sort of software delivery system as well. So it comes as a variable that you can actually insert into Tableau. I'll just very quickly show you the documentation for that page. I'll put a link to this in the description of the YouTube video as well, so you can head to it. And you get a little guide here from Tableau on how to change that on Mac and Windows as well. So it's something that you might think of doing if you want to sort of give this right-hand side part of Tableau a little bit more of a sort of an up-to-date setup. It's also great for customers who have a center of excellence. You can now start to bring elements of that directly into Tableau. And so you can have the latest news, the latest updates here on the right-hand side for people to access directly in the product. So when they open Tableau, they don't just see their content, they see some of the content that's kind of lively in the COE. I expect some really exciting updates here on the right-hand side. I'm sure people will build some incredible web extensions that will sit in this space. So watch the space for that particular capability and see how it evolves. Now, the next three features I'm going to cover are dynamic parameters, buffer calculations, and viz animations. And I'm going to do this all inside of Tableau Desktop. So we're going to switch out of this PowerPoint Google Slides setup, and we're going to get stuck right in. And I'm going to cover them in quick succession. So the first one is dynamic parameters. Okay. If I just switch over to my workbook here that I've got for this particular webinar, you'll see that I've got this very, very simple visualization. It's showing sales over time. It's got sales on rows, segment just in front of that. So you can see that it's split out by the three segments in Superstore sales. You can also see that I've sort of colored the segment in three different ways. And so the thing here has been that if you've ever used a parameter, let's say as a filter, you've always had to manually go into the workbook and update those parameters. So I'm just going to very quickly create a parameter now. And I'm in 2020.1, so this interface will look slightly different if you're using a slightly older version, and you'll see what I mean by that in a second. If I just switch over to a string, and then I select the list option, you can see here that this bottom half of the interface has changed. I've got sort of a new way of sort of assigning values to this parameter. And more importantly, I've also got this new toggle that describes the behavior when a workbook opens. So let's just have a look and see how that works. So I'm going to call this segment. And I'm going to load this parameter from a field in my data source. And in this case, it's going to be the segment field. So I have to choose the right data source. I'm connected to Superstore Excel, which is this file. And I'm going to select segment just there. And so you can see that it dynamically loads the three segments that are available to me just there. And then now, once you've done that, you've got this second toggle, which is what you need to switch to after you've loaded these values dynamically from that field. When you switch to this, it asks you what happens when the workbook opens. And at the moment, nothing happens. It just keeps the parameter as it is. But what you can actually specify now is that every time the workbook opens, you want it to dynamically update this list from a particular field. So we're actually going to choose the same segment from the same data source as we had done before. And so nothing changes here in the interface. Fundamentally, all that happens is when the workbook opens again, it will load from this particular pill. Now, if you're a desktop user, this doesn't make sense, because why would you want to close your workbook and open it again? Well, on Tableau Server, that's actually the behavior that happens when someone visits a visualization. And so this behavior of opening and closing the workbook actually happens all the time for Tableau Server and Tableau Online users, and it automatically updates the fields in there. Also, let's say you're connected to a published data source or a database. You can actually have this workbook, every time you open it, update the parameters, so you don't have to go in and manually load this list. So it's still a useful feature for both authors and users alike. Okay, I'm going to hit OK on this field. And I'm just going to show that parameter here on the right-hand side. So you can see it here as a drop-down. So you've got consumer, corporate, and home office. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open up an Excel file. I'm just going to bring this into view here. So you can see here, I've got a little folder with sample files for this webinar. And I'm just going to open this second file here. Okay. And you'll just have a look and see the changes that I've made. So you'll see here that I've added an order date here in yellow. Okay, that's a little bit into the future. So it goes into, this is probably a date error by the looks of things, but never mind. We'll look at the segment column here and you'll see that I've added a new segment as well. It's called New Corporate. Okay, so what I would expect to see is when I update the data source, close the workbook and open it again, my segment parameter here on the right-hand side should have a new value in there without me having to reload that list. So let's have a go at doing that now. Let me just close this Excel. And my mechanism for updating this is just going to be simply to overwrite this version that's in there already. So I'll just drop that in there. I'll replace. You'll see that's replaced the file. Okay, I'll then go in, I'll redo the extract. And I think that's happened very quickly. And you'll see that the date has come in. Okay, but if I look at my drop down, the new segment isn't there. So what I now need to do is close the workbook. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's save that so we don't lose our changes. And then let's just open Tableau again. Okay, let's open the workbook. And now if I go to this drop down, you'll see here that it's dynamically loaded the new segment into my data source. It's a really, really powerful feature. And the way I'm showing you now is probably the most simplest way you could use this. But if you think of things like date, where you want certain date fields to be dynamically loaded, or certain fields or filters to stay relevant with the data source in question, this is a really, really powerful capability because parameters give you that edge that sometimes filters don't quite give you. So this is a very, very nice way of using that feature. Okay, I head on to the next feature, which is buffer calculations. Now, I have this very, very simple data set here. It's essentially a dummy data set that I created on a website called Mockaroo, and it's just basically a list of car companies distributed across the UK. If I clear this selection here, you'll see these are their locations around the UK. Now, the key thing with the buffer calculation is that it allows us to essentially calculate the distance from a particular point. So it draws a radius around a particular point based on the distance that we specify, okay? And in order to do that, because it's a spatial function, it requires a point, a sort of a spatial point to work with. It's not enough just to have a latitude and longitude, because a latitude and longitude in spatial terms are just X and Y coordinates. Together, they make a point. And so the first thing we should do is create a spatial point for Tableau to use as a reference. So we could do this all in actually one calculation. So if you just bear with me here, let me just start and let me just make this bigger so it's easier to see. Let's just do this. There we go. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to make a point. So I'm just going to say make point, and you'll see the function autocompletes just here. If you're ever in doubt of how to use one of these functions, you can pop out this right-hand side menu, and just if you click on the function, it gives you a description of how it should be used. So you can see here it says make point, latitude, and longitude. That also tells you the right order. I always forget the order in which I should do these things. So let's just get that right here. So it says latitude and then longitude. Okay. And if I just call this a point and click apply, you'll see that my point gets created just there. And it will do essentially the exact same job as what I've got already on the map with latitude and longitude, except for it will use just one data point. Now, in order to do the buffer calculation, we're not quite done yet, because what we really want to do is to be able to do two things. I'd like to be able to dynamically type in a distance and then have Tableau draw the radius around these particular points. And I also need to specify the units. Okay, so if I just go to a new line, something I often do is I just comment out sort of subsections of a calculation by putting in a double // and then I go to a new line and I just type in the new function. So if you see here, I type in buffer and it auto completes with buffer. And it tells me exactly what that notation should look like. So they've actually got an example here where they're making a spatial point themselves. But what I'll do is I'll just skip that first bit, enter a comma, enter another comma just to set up the structure. And I'm going to use kilometers in this particular case. So we can just type that in like this. Okay. And in terms of the units, I'm just going to type in 10 here. I'm not going to use 5 just because that's there. And I'm just going to grab this make point calculation and I'm going to drop it in front of this space here. So we've basically typed out our buffer calculation in full there. And I'll just go over it one more time for everyone's benefit. If I just type in buffer. So you'll see here, first of all, I'm making a spatial point using one of the new features they released last year. I'm specifying a distance around that point, and I'm specifying the units for that distance. So this should draw a 10-kilometer radius around the latitude and longitude, and the function that does that is called buffer. So if I hit apply, you'll see that I now have this buffer calculation here on the left-hand side. So what I'll do is I'll just go to a new sheet and I'll just double click buffer. And you'll see that the dots it draws are actually slightly larger. Let me just format this a little bit so it's easier to see. I'll choose a slightly nicer shade of blue and I'll give it a white border. And I want to go straight to London. Let's just have a look at London and see what's going on here, okay? You can see there's a big overlap of areas here. I haven't got any context here on the map, so let's add that in by going over to map layers at the top, selecting, I'm probably going to choose the streets version of this map, and then I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see that a bit better. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to add in a parameter to allow me to dynamically sort of select these. 10 kilometers looks a bit too large for London because that pretty much covers everywhere that I need. So let's just go back and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to create a new parameter by right clicking on this white space, create parameter. I'm just going to call this distance. I'm going to type in 5 for now. We'll keep it afloat and we'll just leave that as is. I'll then show my parameter here on the right hand side, so you can see that there. Then I'll go back into my buffer calculation, edit that, and I'm going to replace this 10 here with my distance parameter. You can see that it pops up there. If I double click that, you'll see that it's purple. Purple is the notation for parameters. So orange is for calculations, purple for parameters. And then if I hit apply, you'll see that my radius is automatically sort of half in size. So if I click OK, and now I just type in 2 here, you'll see that my buffer calculation is now a little bit more dynamic. And now I can zoom into this sort of area in London. Let's just look at what's in a sort of half a kilometer range. And now you can see how much easier this analysis is to do. Previously, you'd have to have sort of created slightly complex calculations in order to do this, but now it's just a native calculation inside of Tableau, and you can very, very quickly see where there's overlap, where there's sort of, I'm going to call these competing sort of trade regions, but also where, you know, you have a sort of radius around something. So let's say I was using this as a tourist, I could very quickly see what's within a 500-meter radius of a particular place. And that analysis is now very easy to do. So that's buffer calculations for you. Again, that's a very brief example, but hopefully you can think of sort of nice and intuitive ways of using this to sort of bring some new elements to your spatial analysis. Okay, the next thing I'm going to cover is animations, and this requires a little bit of a sort of a preamble. Okay, so if I just switch over to a new sheet. I'm going to use Superstore Sales. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the Tableau icon and just connect to a nice clean copy of Superstore Sales. I'll take an extract so it runs really nice and fast. And I'll just sort of start the demo from this point. In many ways, you could follow along if you have Tableau yourself, but I encourage you to just watch. So in the past, if I just build a simple bar chart, let's say we want to look at subcategory. And I just bring in profit on columns. You'll see I get a very simple bar chart. Let's sort this in descending order. And I'm just going to hold command and drag subcategory into my filters, maybe just remove one of them. And then if I show the filter on the right-hand side, you can see that as I made some of those changes, animations were already on, okay? And the way to switch animations on and off is to simply go to the format option at the top, and you'll see here it's got its own little sort of area, and it's just animations, and you click on it and you get this pane on the left hand side. And if I switch it off and then take out a few items, you can see the behavior we're used to with Tableau is this instant sort of removal and addition of items when you make a change in your filter. If I switch it on, however, and I just start removing items, you can see that Tableau animates that transition. And depending on your computer and its resources, you should get a very smooth sort of experience of those animations. Now, on the left-hand side, it's worth bearing in mind that there are some settings you have to think about. The first one is duration. You get some nice sort of presets here. And by default, it's set to fast because, again, users are used to very fast interactions with Tableau. So the fast option makes a lot of sense here. But if you look at some of the other options, you can have very, very slow animations. Let's just have a look and see how this works. So the way this is working is when I add fasteners, for example, it's animating that object in, creating the item over here, and then you can see that sort of interaction happening. Let's say I remove phones from this list. You'll see everything moves up one and it animates the item out of the list. Okay. Now, the interesting thing here is, let's say we decide to split this by category. Okay, if I just drag category in front of the mark, you can see here that it's got a slightly different sort of set of grouping. And then again, if I bring that onto color, it's a little bit easier to see. But you'll notice there that it animated the color as well. It's not just animating shapes, it's also animating color. So that's something to bear in mind as well. If I just step back one, you'll see that transition fade out. And again, if I step forward one, you'll see that animation sort of play through. Now, as you build different chart types, this becomes really, really interesting. If I very quickly bring a product name onto detail, this will draw me a waffle chart with all my products in one place. And I just want to compare profit ratio with, let's say, the quantity sold. Okay, so, you know, where are my products that are not profitable and where am I selling lots of them? Okay, and you get this very simple sort of scatter plot. I'll reduce the size a little bit. In fact, what I should do is put sales on size so you get an element of what's actually going on. And I'll change the shape to a circle just to make it easier to see what's going on. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about something like a scatter plot is that you can actually see behaviors and transitions in a much more interesting way. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to essentially just be able to filter out categories in and out of this mix, just to see how this affects the sort of overall spread. So let's bring in category onto filters. We'll tick all of them for now. The quicker way to have done that actually is to just right-click category and show filter. Sometimes you get into sort of a habit and you end up doing things the slow way, but the fast way is to just right-click, show filter, and it appears here on the right-hand side as well. Okay. What I'll also do is I'll also color this by the category, and you can see that animation happens there. Now, the last thing I'll do is change this animation so that it's a little bit faster. Let's just make it twice as fast, 1 second. Okay. And just watch what happens as I remove office supplies. You can see that the whole animation changes because the axis, the marks, everything needs to move to sort of give an area of context. But the reason this scatter plot can be confusing to users is because the axis is also changing in this particular case. So if I just sort of remove furniture there, you can see that because the axis is changing, it's changing the point of context for users. So something you have to bear in mind is maybe potentially fixing your axis so that the point of context isn't changing every single time something happens. Otherwise, how would someone sort of be able to make quick sort of decisions and based on, you know, what's in front of them? So you can fix the axis to stop that happening. And also one thing you can do is you can sort of give it more of a narrative feel. Okay, you can add a little bit more of a journey using the pages function, which is here on the top. Or you could try something a little bit more nuanced where you sort of play through specific scenarios, maybe using dates and time as well. Okay. The last example I'll show you will be a simple line chart. So let's bring out sales onto rows and then bring order date onto columns. And you'll see that it generates a very simple bar chart, line chart, sorry, by year. I'd actually like this to be continuous months. So let's just do it like that. And then watch what happens as I drag category onto color. You'll see that it splits the lines in a sort of a very nice animation. So you can kind of see how that overall performance is affected by the different lines. What you can also do is if you bring category onto rows, and essentially if I just hit the plus icon here, you'll see it's not so easy to see here, actually. It's maybe a bug in my version, but what you can essentially get it to do is to split these lines depending on the level of detail, okay? So you can have them sitting separately and then have them merge into a single line in a very nice animation. There's a couple of really, really good examples I'd like to show you on the internet, which have been done by members of the community. So if you just head over to the Tableau 2020.1 new features, you'll see there's some really good examples. And the example I want to sort of highlight to you is a visualization by Mark Reed. Mark Reed essentially recreated the animation by Hans Rosling here in this particular visualization. And he's also using a new capability available on Tableau Server and Tableau Online, and that is the ability to play through pages. So you can see here that if I hit play, that this visualization, when it decides to refresh itself, actually starts to animate through the individual steps. And so now, using the pages function and the animations, I'm not clicking through this, it's just playing on its own. And it's now starting to tell that very famous story that, if you've had the opportunity to see Hans Rosling do, is a very sort of well-known story. Now, if I just pause this, what Mark has also done here is he's brought into play features like set actions and parameter actions into this. So for example, if I click on India, what this visualization does is it brings all the countries that are part of South Asia into a single circle. And then I can continue playing that through to see how that particular group compares to everywhere else. So it's a really powerful analysis. And the key thing here is that he's keeping the axis the same. Notice that the axis isn't changing just because the whole range isn't being used. The other thing is that it's giving you a point of context on the visualization with a year. Okay, and he's added this sort of really nice ability to actually just merge all the countries into their constituent zones, or break them up into smaller sort of, countries, as it were. And again, if you click on a particular country, you can keep grouping that up until everything works. The other thing is that you can change what's on the axis. So it really becomes a very dynamic visualization. Here, this goes into a straight line because I unintelligently chose the same thing on both axes. But if we go to the next one, let's say child survival, you actually start to see, again, a new story play out. So animations makes this a much more interactive sort of capability that I think allows you to publish content to your Tableau server that really starts to tick that box of storytelling, where you can page through periods in time or moments, and then allow users to sort of navigate that themselves with very sort of simple interfaces that they can use. Okay. So that's just a very brief examples. I've seen so many examples out there in the Tableau community, and no two examples have been the same so far. So this is definitely something to just start playing around with and start using. It will no doubt improve over time. For something in Tableau to get its own menu seems to suggest that, that menu is going to be developed over time, and you're going to be able to do more and more interesting things. The last thing to bear in mind is that each and every single mark type has a different animation behavior. So Tableau have made it so you don't have to think about this in the background, but the key thing to remember here is that each animation type is going to work better or worse depending on the scenario. So this is going to take a little bit of trial and error, but also look out for users in the community who are going to be talking about best practice that you can sort of use and use to sort of adapt your own work to meet your own needs. Okay. If I just head back to my slides. You can see here that we've covered the three key features in this release. The last one is an interesting one. Explain Data is a feature that's now been in Tableau for just coming to a year. If I just open a new sheet, and again, I'll just do a simple scatter plot. Maybe this time I'll do another one. Let's do product on detail. Let's do sales, and let's do quantity. Okay, and so you can see you get a bunch of circles, and let's not size that by profit ratio. Let's size it by sales as well. It just makes a little bit more sense. And when you click on any particular mark in Tableau, you always get this sort of command pane here at the top. Okay, and Explain Data sits behind this little sort of light bulb icon that sits at the third from right in this view. And when you click on it, what it tries to do is it analyzes your data, and it tries to see if there's any particular sort of poignant information behind that data point that would cause that data point in this example to be an outlier. And so it's identified here there's a single extreme value in this particular data set. And it even tries to highlight that particular transaction for you, so you can see the effect of that transaction. You can see it draws a chart over here, and you can see that how that sort of one data point sits. It also allows you to sort of break that out into its own chart, so you can take that chart and actually use that as part of your analysis. Maybe that in itself is a useful sort of thing to have in your chart. The thing they keep doing with Explain Data is they keep enhancing its capabilities. So over the last few months, they've been improving its speed. They've been improving some of its capabilities. In the most recent version, they've actually added the ability for it to handle wider data sets. So if you've got a lot of columns in your data sets, it's now able to do analysis on those large, wide data sets. But also they've added this status bar here on the bottom. You can see my mouse sort of hovering over it. Where it tells you how many fields it's considered in this analysis. And if you hit this information icon, it actually lists those items out for you. So this starts to give you a little bit more context as to what it's actually doing, and it helps you start to understand and maybe give you ideas as an author of where your analysis can go for your particular dashboard. Or if you're using this for ad hoc analysis, it kind of tells you and signals to you where to start looking and how to sort of make use of some of the information that you're seeing. What it's doing in the background is it's running some machine learning algorithms, which essentially sort of looks across all the columns and it tries to figure out what's going on. In this particular case, in terms of quantity, you'll see that there's a high number of records, and there's also that same extreme single value as well. So it's a really, really powerful tool to help you sort of get into analysis really quickly and help sort of steer your focus as to where you want to go. Okay. Now, the last feature I want to cover is an export button. So to show you this, I'm just going to open up a sample workbook. Sample workbooks are really good, by the way, because they help you sort of baseline performance in your Tableau workbook. So I always use them in demos and examples because everyone has them in their version of Tableau. And secondly, they all perform exactly the same way, regardless of which machine they're on. So it's a really good baseline to use when you're using Tableau. What you'll notice is in the objects pane here on the left-hand side, they've actually added a new feature here, which is export. In order to show you this, I'm just going to hit floating and then drag this out onto the canvas. And you can see that it's just basically an export button. Now, there have been lots of sort of hacky ways to do this in the past, and specifically people have been targeting things like Excel and CSV. This is not that. This allows you to export PDFs, images, and PowerPoint files, essentially. So if we edit this button, we get this interface. And you can see here that the three options I have are image, PDF, and PowerPoint. I think the key reason here is that, in a dashboard, people who have access to it through Tableau Server or Tableau Online already have the ability to download the data. Whereas this is designed to help make it really, really easy for someone to essentially take a snapshot of this and then take it away with them for a meeting or for some other sort of analysis, maybe face-to-face rather than in front of a screen. And so you can choose which format you want to export to here. if I select an image, you can see that I get that option. You can change the button to just be a text button or an image button. So if you've got some nice icons you'd like to use for this capability, you can absolutely implement those. In my case, I'll just stick to text. And then you can enter a title. I don't need a title in this particular case, but you could say export. And what it will do, if I hit apply, you'll see it will change the text inside of that button. The other thing I can do is format the font. I can make it really large. If I hit apply, you'll see that I made it orange. And then I can also add a border to it just to give it a little bit more of a pop. So let's just try and, I'm going to make this look really unappealing, so it's really obvious the changes I'm making. And then you can give it a tooltip. So when someone hovers over it, they know what it's going to do. So let's say export image. Okay. And I'm going to hit apply. And I'm going to click OK. And so I'm just going to keep it here at the top. This is probably the worst place to put it. I should probably put it here on the right-hand side, but I'll just keep it here at the top for the purpose of this webinar. Then I'll go into preview. And you'll see here that it's now there. And when I hover over it, I get that tooltip that we mentioned. But when I hit export, it actually opens the file interface in this particular case to allow me to save it. Now, if you're on Tableau Server, what it actually does is it opens up a pop-up window. So let me show you how that works. If I just go back to the What's New features and close Mark's Viz, you'll see that James Smith here has actually incorporated the export button into his visualization. So if I just click this hamburger menu here on the top right-hand side, you'll see that he's got an export to PDF button in his animated viz. And when I click on that, and I'm online now, I'm on the internet using Tableau, in this case, Tableau Public, but Tableau Online and Tableau Server have the same capability. You can see that I can choose specific items. I actually get an interface as to what I actually want to do. So I want to export this view. The scaling can be set to whatever you want. So I'll leave it to automatic. Now I'll give you a free, really powerful tip here. Whenever you see paper size, never use any paper size. It's really unintuitive here, because what happens is that Tableau scales the image to fit that specific size. Whereas if you just want a PDF with an image that allows you to scale it however large you want, then unspecified is the secret hero here. So if you click unspecified, and we'll set it to landscape and then hit download, what Tableau does is it generates the PDF. A PDF in itself is a vector item. So I'll put it to my downloads folder, and then we'll just fire up that PDF straight away. And so you'll see here it's generated the PDF. But because I didn't specify a size, I can now zoom in to whatever sort of size I want, and it's always going to be sharp. Whereas when you set it to a particular paper size, it actually keeps the font and everything rendered to that specific dimension. So the further you zoom in, the more pixelated it will actually get. This gives you crisp, almost print quality images that you can use in your sort of marketing or exports. And you can see here, this is a very nice PDF. You could then print this from here using a printer or whatever, but typically you normally attach this to an email and then send it off. So that's basically the export to PDF button that's available in the product. It's a nice addition. It gives authors a slightly different way to give users some interaction with their content, but it should go without saying that you still have the ability to do downloads of things like data and crosstab. You can see it's disabled here, but you've always had that capability here in the toolbar, the visualization. So it's not new functionality specifically, but that button and the quick access to those three things: images, PDFs, and I always forget the last one, PowerPoint, that's the other one, is a much sort of welcomed feature. Okay. That's pretty much it for all the new features in 2020.1. We covered most of the authoring capabilities. Again, I'd just like to sort of call out the webinar that we had in the past for Tableau Prep and some of the other features we're also going to cover in future webinars, especially the Tableau Server capabilities, including some of the management add-ons and so on and so forth. So definitely look out for content on that front. I'm now just going to, I haven't been paying attention to any of the questions the whole time, so I'm just going to look over to the questions. No one's asked any questions so far, so if you've got a question in mind, let me just look and see if I can look at some. Okay, so we've got a question here. Can you remove the panel with the export? So I think the sentiment of this question is, can you remove this bottom panel? The answer is yes, but only on Tableau Online and Tableau Server, essentially the paid product. With Tableau Public, you technically can't, because excuse me there. Tableau is essentially promoting its product. Okay, so you can play some tricks to hide it, but you can't remove it. It's always going to be available there. So that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, yes. So sorry, the filters pane here. So Marta's just chatting to me in the comments. In this particular case, yes, this is using a function that was introduced last year called show and hide containers. So I can very, very quickly show you how that's done. Essentially, what you need to do is bring in any container. In this case, I'll make it floating, horizontal. Okay, and you'll need to put some content into it. So I'm just going to put a blank item inside of that, so it just takes up no space. And then what you can do is if I select not the blank item, but the actual container, you can add and show and hide button. Okay, and that allows that container to be activated like so. And so if I then go to a preview, you'll see here that as I click this, it clicks in between the items. So it's actually showing and hiding the container using that capability, if that makes sense. Okay. So Mart's adding some real-time feedback here. He's specifically asking if it can be removed so that it's not included in the PDF. So if I go in here, I think you mean this particular image. It's a good question. I think by design, because I left this open, Tableau is going to include that in the PDF. So what you'd probably want to do is maybe make that button available somewhere that it won't take up sort of space in your design, but it's always going to show that button in the design. It's probably actually quite a good feature request to somehow have it sort of remove the button, because it knows what that object is, from the image or PowerPoint that's created, if that makes sense. So that's actually a pretty good idea. You can always submit these ideas to Tableau Ideas. So I think, Mark, you should do that. If not, I'll don't let me beat you to it. So definitely, I think that would be quite a nice addition. Okay. I don't know if there's any other questions. Now's your chance. We've got a bit of time before the end of the webinar to address some of those. Okay. So just to close out, what I'll do is I'll just highlight to you some of the places where you can find all these features. Tableau themselves have a very good page that announces sort of all the features in one place. It's a very nice way of seeing what the headline features are. Those are typically the features that they know people are going to love. But if you scroll to the bottom here, you can see that they actually have this section here that allows you to see all the new sort of products that they have. But also if you select a particular product, then it allows you to see what's specifically new for that particular product. You'll get some duplication because, as I said before, some of these features aren't just available for Tableau desktop, they're also available for Tableau Online. So you'll see that sort of duplication happening, especially as Tableau moves more and more capability to its web product. You'll end up sort of finding most of their stuff comes online first rather than a little bit later on. But that's pretty much it. I've just got a couple more questions. Do you know much about what performance is like with animations? That's a really good question, actually. So performance is an interesting one. I think one thing I will add is twofold. Not everyone sees animations. I should have probably highlighted that. So let's just go to Tableau if I go to online.tableau.com. I'm going to take you to my online test instance, if I can actually spell today, online.tableau.com. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my sort of test environment for Tableau Online, which is just like Tableau Server. And I'm going to show you a feature that every single user has available to them related to animations. Okay, if I go over to my own settings, so you can see here I've got some dummy content and some example content. If I go to my account settings, okay, at the very bottom of my account settings, you'll see here, it's sort of difficult to show you here, but you'll see here at the very bottom is a setting for animations. So on Tableau Server, it's possible that a user can actually disable it at an individual level. I think this is a good idea because sometimes animations and movements can cause some people to have nausea. So try not to do that deliberately. But that feature is going to be there. So not everyone who you think is seeing an animation is actually going to see an animation if they have this disabled. And following on from that, there has been performance testing of animations on Tableau Server. Now, Tableau's general advice is that in essence, it shouldn't affect performance in a sort of recognizable way, because much of what's happening is being enabled through sort of the back end of what's happening with data and queries. But fundamentally, I think that, you know, we still haven't had any sort of solid evidence to show the difference between animations on and animations off. So it's something that I think you have to trial in your own environment, maybe in a test environment. You can run something like Logshark or TabJolt to kind of see if there's any impact on visualizations that have animations switched on. I think over the next 3 months, we'll definitely see that from the community. So maybe as you're waiting to upgrade or testing, it's definitely something sort of to be aware of. Okay. We've just had someone join the session late. Not to worry, the sessions are recorded. All the sessions are recorded and are available on our YouTube channel a little bit later on. So we'll get this up in the next few days. So don't worry if you've missed or just joined or joined late or had to nip off during the webinar. All our webinar is available to you here on our YouTube channel, so you can get involved. Okay, I'll just wait a couple more minutes for any more questions if anyone has any. Okay, I'll assume no one has any. Of course, you can always reach out to us online on our Twitter, YouTube, pretty much any communication method you can think of. You'll find the Information Lab. So just reach out. Engage with our events as well. We have a whole host of events available pretty much all the time. Some of it based in our data school in London, some of it remote for some of you who obviously can't be here in the UK as well. So definitely get engaged with that. We're going to be trying to do a lot more content as well over time. So tune into some of that content. And as always, if you've got ideas for content you'd like to see in the webinar, let us know as well. We're more than open to ideas for content you'd like to see. But that's it. I've been Tim. Thank you for tuning into this webinar, and we'll catch you in the next webinar that we run.